So all of our recordings are available on our YouTube channel for you to watch and share, and we will share the YouTube link after this event so that you can share it with people who weren't able to make it tonight. So just some housekeeping. If people could keep themselves muted unless they're talking, just to keep background noise to a minimum. And also if we could, when the three speakers are doing their presentations, then just everybody else turns their camera off so that we can have a nice view of the speakers. So today's session is a very important topic. I don't think something that we have touched on lightly in different areas, but I think that it's really nice to get this broad overview of this topic. So the session today is on equality and diversity. We're going to be looking at the Equality Act, which the main aim when it was implemented was to eliminate discrimination, to advance equality and of opportunity, and to foster good relations. And it protects people against discrimination with protected characteristics, which I'm sure some of our speakers will give a bit more detail on. The hope of this Equality Act was to make the lives of people better who are protected by the protected characteristics. And I guess we want to discuss to what extent that has happened and what more can be done, because there can always be more that can be done. And what more can we do to support people with disabilities and differences to live a full life. So first, I believe, and tell me speakers if I'm doing the wrong order, but we are going to have Mags, then Zai, then Norman at the end. So I will introduce our first speaker. So if everybody else could turn their cameras off, and we will invite you back at the end of the session, unless you're a presenter, and then you can leave your camera on. So first we've got Mags Lewis, who joined the Green Party in 2007 whilst an NHS manager in Leicester. I used to work in the NHS, so I absolutely take my hat off to you, Mags. I don't know how you're still doing it, but I'm sure she'll tell us why. So she had to take ill health retirement in 2014 after a couple of serious relapses in her MS. A local activist for green and disability issues, and has stood for national office, elected mayor, and is target to win council candidate for the forthcoming elections in 2023. She was first appointed spokesperson for disabled people in 2016 to 19, and is delighted to be taking on this role once again. So There we go.
Oh, well, thank you so much for the introduction. I'm delighted to be here tonight. Yes, so it's my second stint as spokesperson, but it's quite. Can you hear me, by the way? Yeah, yes, that's good. It's quite different this time in that I think when I was first appointed spokesperson, it was a very new idea. They'd appointed spokespersons, but there was very little kind of national support. So it was very ad hoc, and there was a little panic if you were asked to do an interview or something. Whereas this time around, there's a spokesperson's WhatsApp group and things, so there's a bit more mutual support from other spokespeople. So I just wanted to outline a little bit what the spokesperson role is about, why they came up with it, and what I see my role as. And then I'll talk a little bit more after that. But I suppose I looked it up just to see what they originally wanted, and they said they wanted to get a team with lived experience in our particular areas to act as to advocate for and have a role in recruiting new voters, I suppose, or new party members, I suppose, in more hard to reach areas, I suppose, like disability. And also they wanted the spokespeople to come from grassroots activist roles, so that we're already involved with the party. I saw an interesting quote from Jonathan Bartley, one of the leaders, or the past leaders, and he said, these aren't just spokespeople, we are megaphones for a movement of people who want real change. So I thought that was quite interesting. I'm actually a megaphone. But I think it's been really important on two levels, really. First of all, to raise the profile of disability and disability issues and disabled people within the party, but also outside the party. And I know maybe Zai will talk about it a bit later, but I think one of the issues we've had for a long time is often the disabled people seem like the kind of added extra, or something that people don't see as really core. And even with the Equality Act, etc., it almost seems to think they think it's a kind of optional extra rather than being really embedded. And I haven't really seen, despite warm words from everyone, including government, but even in the Green Party, I think it's not been seen as high profile as it should be. And we've had to do quite a lot of work in raising issues with the leaders, etc., just so that they're aware that we have to be at the table. So I suppose the role is about, as I say, two-pronged, about trying to raise awareness, but also outside the party too. But one of the things I find very key is where there's crossover with other spokespeople's remits, etc. For example, with transport, because we all want car-free cities, but obviously car-free centres has a huge impact on disabled people who may need their blue badges and access. And it's trying to make sure that we're thought about first and foremost whenever they're looking at these kind of policy issues, and that we're at the table, because there have been some uncomfortable examples around the country where I feel we feel that our needs have been sidelined or seen as, well, that's it, we need to prioritize this, and that's just unacceptable on so many levels. And I think it means it doesn't show the party is as welcoming to disabled people as it could be. So I think we're always trying to look at making sure that they understand what caveats are needed in policy, and also about understanding that we've so much to offer. And it's not just like, oh God, it's, we've got to make sure about this or adhere to the Act. It's about thinking, these disabled community have got so many incredible people who just want to help and support and have a lot to offer. And I would put myself in that camp too, because although I can no longer work in my old job, it means I've been freed up to do a lot more work for the Green Party. I hope that's enough.
Absolutely. And I think, with all our speakers, it's really about sparking conversation. And I think that's exactly what you've done with that introduction there. I mean, some of the stuff that you said around the role of the spokesperson, with it being both internal and external outreach. And I think that is important, and not just with people who have disabilities or differences within the Green Party, but with everybody in the Green Party. This is a conversation for us all to have. What you were saying about it needs to be high priority. I used to do a lot of this in the NHS when I was working there as well, around buildings and new buildings that are being built, and how, for me, like, it should just be accessible, everything accessible first.
Exactly.
And why are we not, like, why is that not the basic or the standard that we're working to now? And instead, like you said, it's an afterthought of like, oh, we've built this new building or this new office space, and now we have to make it disabled friendly. And it's like, why was that just not in the plans? So absolutely an important conversation to have. And like you said at the end there, being self-critical. We have to be self-critical if we want to improve as the Green Party and be more accessible and be not just like accepting, but a real champion of people with disabilities. So agree. So thank you for kicking us off there. Just a reminder to everybody that you can ask questions as we go through the presenters in the chat, and we will come back to them at the end when we do the Q&A. Okay, so our second speaker, Zai, is the current convener of the Disability Committee and has been a tireless campaigner for social environmental justice for many years, with the rights of disabled people and people of colour being of particular interest. She's a successful career as a social worker and as a Paralympian. and has represented her country many times across 2 sports and has won 2 golds, 2 silver, and 2 bronze medals. You'll have to tell us what the sport is because it doesn't say it here in my notes. But please take your 10 minutes away, and thank you for joining us.
Oh, well, thank you for inviting me. But just to do the boring stuff. Yeah, so I was Paralympian. Actually, it was several sports. I initially started at the age of 14, many decades ago, and swimming was my first sport. Table tennis, javelin, shot, and discus. I've done many other sports in the sports, but they're the ones that I've mainly had medals in, and Paralympic medals in table tennis, javelin, shot, and discus, and I was a world record holder for 4 years in javelin. So that part. Yeah, so I've really bucked the trend in many ways because I'm quite senior, and so my working career kind of was in the 80s, early 80s, and I was a field social worker. So if people ever can remember the days when you had community social workers working out in the field, I'm a permanent wheelchair user, full-time wheelchair user. I don't walk or stand at all. We call tetraplegic. So I became disabled at a very young age through a spinal injury. And I was absolutely adamant that I was only going to do the job in the same way as anybody else. So that meant I needed assistance to get into people's homes, etc., etc. And that's with a lot of negotiations and being involved in writing a job description, for somebody to assist me into getting in and out of people's homes, in court, going to court, because over my career, I was a generic social worker, but then we went into specialisms, and I actually specialised in child protection. So that covered, emergency work, adoptions, sadly, on an odd occasion, removing children from the environment and going into, quite risky situations. I worked in a borough that, we had huge problems in terms of drugs, etc., etc. But I'll have to say that actually, looking back on it, I loved it. I absolutely loved the work that I did, and I loved the people that I was working with, as in, I put it inverted commas, my clients, and never really had a problem. And I had one of the things that it was found that I was quite good at dealing with difficult people, and that most probably was to do with that I'm difficult myself. Anybody who knows me will know that I'm quite vocal and difficult. So, and I wear that as a badge of honor myself. So yeah, in terms of the Equalities Act, so if we go back to the Equalities Act of 2010, prior to that, there were lots and lots of legislation. There was 106. So what the Equalities Act of 2010, it brought together 116 different parts of legislation in terms of the protected characteristics. So, that covered race and colour, it covered women, it covered disability, it covered LGBT issues, it covered gender reassignment. So it covers the 2010. There were things like gender reassignment was added into that. But we have to actually have a look at to some degree, look at the history of that. So yes, it was very complicated in terms of, so the whole idea was that it was to make positive changes for people who in our society were discriminated against, and to enable it to be enacted, to do it simply. But at the same time, round about that time, starting with Blair, and very definitely with this government who've now been in, since 2010, in some ways society has changed. It has become very discriminatory, and it's all about, it's all about, in many ways, dog eat dog. And so one of the things that you were asking me was to look at the Equalities Act, or some of it, and actually see, was it beneficial? Is it beneficial? So if we took it, I'll start with disability first, because that's actually my area of expertise. Disability has, so if we look at some of the positives, so one of the things that's positive is that, to a degree, buses became wheelchair accessible. But what actually has happened is, first and foremost, it wasn't great, because what it did was it separated disabled people. I happen to know people who became disabled through a car accident, a couple, but actually can't travel on the bus together. We are the only one group of society that cannot travel together. If you're a wheelchair user, you cannot travel together on a bus. Had that happened to any other group of society, I suspect there would have been anarchy, but it seems to be okay. Then we've had situations where, I'm sure many of you have seen the wheelchair spaces, and it's kind of an area. So it was positive for the wheelchair spaces, for parents with very young children and buggies. It has not been positive for wheelchair users. And we've even had court cases about it, where we've had situations where, parents with buggies have actually gone to court challenging that should be for wheelchair, a space purely for wheelchairs, or priority for wheelchairs. And then we've had disabled people challenging that position. So we actually have a situation where we had parents won their case, and it was deemed, and I'm going to say on a personal level, it was deemed that if you were a parent with a buggy, that you had a mobility difficulty. And so the court went on, in that case, the court went on the side of that. In terms of disabled people with, mobility and wheelchair users, they also won their court case. So we have a bizarre situation in this country at the moment, because I think the courts are really not knowing what to do with this situation. So of course, they also won their case. So we have a kind of bizarre limbo at the moment in terms of who has rights over that space. So if we look at how things have changed, so if you look at, I think that the Equalities Act has actually been weaponized. There are many people that are using the Equalities Act as a form of weapon against other groups of people that are protected. So, and again, if you look at the ideology, and there's a really good book that people should read, which is The War on Disabled People by Ellen Clifford, who's actually done some research into how there is an ideology in terms of disabled people, that it started with the Labour government, but the Tories have taken it on and actually pushed it further. And that is that disabled people have too much power in society. So the whole ideology was to disempower disabled people. So one of the ways that's been done is through the benefit changes. Another way is a bit like the wheelchair spaces on buses. We're now at a point, and you also have to remember, in 2012 we had an amazing thing in this country. We took on the Olympics and Paralympics. And one would have thought that this is celebrated by the nation. One would have thought that would have raised the issues of disability. But actually, since 2012, things for disabled people have got worse. Absolutely worse. And if you look at what's happening in local authorities in terms of care, the local authorities are cutting care on disabled people. They're not doing proper assessments. They're actually telling disabled people who were having support, say at night, well, you can live without that, because what you can do is you can wear nappies in bed. Incredibly dehumanizing. And if you and that's all, the government has put real rhetoric that disabled people are scroungers, that we don't want to work, we're work shy. Again, this is not true. And then because many disabled people work. Now, I come from a position where I believe that disabled people should have the right to work. There are disabled people who may feel that it's not healthy for them to work, and that should be okay. And we should have a benefit system that enables people to afford to live. Now, I've noticed that there's a colleague here. If we look at the cost of living, who is actually hugely reliant on energy. And from the spinally injured world, we have people who are living on ventilators at home, because nowadays you can actually live on a ventilator. You can have one on your wheelchair, or you can go out and about and do whatever you want to do. And then you have a bigger supportive machine at night. People like this, and people with diabetes, people who are on pumps, feeding pumps, they cannot do without energy, because if you take this energy away, that is the end. That is really a difficult situation in terms of their everyday living. So I'm just going to finally finish with, in terms of just one other thing in terms of internally in the party and externally, because we are really poor in the party on disability. I can tell you, as as the chair of the disability group, but also in terms of being on GPEX for the equalities and diversity. Our complaint system is quite discriminatory against disabled people. I am appalled at the number of people that are beginning to actually take complaints against disabled people. There has been a big rise in this in the party. But then when you have a look at things like, we had 25%, 20 to 25% of the population have a disability or a long-term health condition. What an amazing number of people that we could bring in to vote for us. That's a quarter of the population. What a huge difference that would make. But we appear not to want those voters, because we never put out. I look at Twitter quite a lot just to see what's going on, and I very rarely see the party putting stuff out on disability issues. The cost of living. They do it in terms of general, but we never ever put anything out. I tried to push that at the last lot of elections that we had earlier on this year, that every leaflet that we put out during those elections, that there would be something about our amazing social care policy. And we've been quoted as being the most out there policy on social care in of all of the political parties, yet we did nothing about it. That was such an opportunity in terms of open door. So we really and then I'll just, the last bit is on intersectionality. I very much believe in intersectionality because I'm a woman, I'm disabled, I'm of colour, and I'm senior. So if we all recognise within the liberation groups that we have people that come under all of these protected characteristics within the group that we're representing, we would then be pushing the proper areas. You know, so disability wouldn't just be the responsibility of disabled people. The issues of racism would not be the responsibility of our, you know, very few members of colour. It would be all of our responsibilities. And that's where intersectionality really becomes important. Or I believe it becomes incredibly important, that we all have a responsibility to ensure that there is not discrimination, that our policies actually, you know, our policies cover areas of race, disability, women's issues, that we as a party follow the Equalities Act of 2010. And, you know, we actually can do better. We can absolutely do better. And one of the other areas is class. And we fail miserably in terms of class. And again, it's another massive open door for us to do well. But until we actually start dealing with this internally, and actually saying, yes, this is where we're going to go, this is what needs to change, and not leave it down to the responsibility of people like me, the chair of Greens of Colour, you know, our spokesperson for disability, or just the women's group, or our LGBTQAI plus. We all have to be doing something. And so that's in some ways my message is, and I'm absolutely open to questions later on. But I hope that's been an interesting, you know, overview. And thank you very much.
Interesting. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for giving us a bit of your personal perspective, but also that political view, and also that historic looking back at the policy that is there as well. I mean, so many things that you mentioned that are shocking, but at the same time there's a lot of things that we already know and that we need to do better on. I mean, like, you know, the concept of weaponizing a piece of legislation that is supposed to be there to help the most vulnerable in society is just really, obviously this happens, but it's really difficult to think about that happening. Like you say, some of the things that were there to benefit and protect people with disabilities ends up actually making their lives harder sometimes. What you said about two people not being able to travel on a bus together is just like a really sad representation of how wrong we get it in terms of accessibility. Just going through my notes, which I've made a lot of, obviously. Again, there's been like a key theme between both of the speakers that we've had today, in that disability and people with differences, this subject isn't something on its own. It is something that is integral to every key policy area that we have. And if we want to do better, we need to make it and show it as that integral part that it is, rather than just having it as this add-on or afterthought. And again, what you said, Zai, around it's not just the responsibility of people who are protected, who have protected characteristics. It is the responsibility of everybody within the Green Party and beyond that. I can see lots of chat going on in the meeting chat, so thank you for that. I will have a look. But before we move to questions, we've got our final speaker, who I'm sure those of you who are from Stroud will know. Norman is our district councillor for Nailsworth and is himself a minority ethnic community, an East London Jew. He has been an active member of Stroud District Council, small but very enthusiastic Equality and Diversity Working Party since its inception. And he's going to share with us some of its successes and some of the enduring challenges that it faces and we face as a community. Thanks, Norman. Oh, we can't hear you, Norman. Okay, well, we still can't hear you, Norman, sorry. I can see you, but I can't hear you. Okay, well, Norman is getting his headphones on. We will just see if we have one question in the chat that we can run to. Oh. No, we still can't hear you. Oh, hello. Say something, Norman. Oh no, it's fuzzy. I'm sorry. Okay, I'll do one question, Norman, while you try and get the microphone working. And if not, and then we'll be able to come back to you once it's sorted. No, I can't hear you. Oh, it just came on then. If you click on the mute button, if you click on the small arrow next to the mute button, there should be a list that comes up and you should be able to select a microphone and a speaker. And if you select probably your laptop speaker and microphone, it might work. No, I can't hear you. No. No, I'm sorry, Norman. I don't know if you want to try and leave and come back in again. And I will just do one of the questions that's in the chat for now and just, oh, say something. No, sorry. Okay, I'm going to go to some of the questions that are in the chat. So, Loppy Lou Bridge? No. Wait, sorry. Oh, hi. Sai, did you have a question?
I didn't have a question, but I was just, if you wanted, while we're trying to sort this out. I mean, one of the things that I did not raise, and it does need to be raised, is in terms of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. I mean, that is hugely rising in this country, and you know, that's something that we also need to be hugely looking at, because you know, and that's in terms of racism, but we're not very good at that as well, and you know, we do see a huge amount of, I mean, a huge amount of that going on, and again, that's, you know, coming from the government, really, the way they, you know, if you actually look at in terms of the, you know, the immigration situation that we have at the moment, this has been pushed by our government, because that's their narrative, because it's always about putting people down, and then also for us to be looking at how that has related to colonialism. So, you know, in terms of the you know, the British history. And I think that's something that we also need to be thinking about. It may be that Norm's now ready, so I shall put my hand down.
No, thank you for stepping in there though, and you're absolutely right on that. It's a subject that we've touched on a few times at the Cloud Cafe, you know, racism, colonialism, and what that looks like in today's society. And you're right, it's growing. And okay, tell us, Norman, are you here and can we hear you?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Oh,
you.
wow.
Fantastic, amazing.
Great.
Thank you for stepping in there, Zai. But welcome, Norman. Thank you for persevering.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm a member of the District Council's Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Working Group, EDI, and it's been going for about 2 years now. And it's with thanks to Martin Whiteside that we got going in the first place. At the time, he was leader of the Green Group on the council, and he proposed that we needed an EDI working group, and everybody was in favour of that. So I've been a member from the start. It's quite a small working group, only 4 members, 5 members, and roughly the same number of officers, but we're all really enthusiastic. There is only one Conservative member of the working group, although she is a good, strong member of the group. And I think that's a reflection of the lack of commitment by the Conservative group generally to this. So they nominated one person, but not more than that. And in those couple of years, we've had to decide where our priorities are and what we want to cover. And it's very difficult because if you've had a glance at the Equality Act, it covers such a wide area that that you can lose your way quite easily. And we started off by developing contacts with other groups like Stroud Against Racism and the Muslim community and Stroud Pride and so on. And we worked on from there. In terms of the problems that we've had, I think the problem that I would highlight is what I would call latent prejudice on the part of the vast majority of people, including me, if I'm being honest. And where it comes from is our childhood and upbringing. For instance, my parents had not very complimentary descriptions for Black people, Schwarzes, and non-Jewish people. And you have to overcome that. And that's true of one's community as well. I think all communities are rather inward looking, and outside groups are regarded as somewhat of a threat. So the task that there is for us, particularly with councillors, with members, is kind of drip, trying to overcome that latent prejudice and stop the prejudice becoming actual discrimination. With, I think, members of staff, it's less of a problem because it's a structured arrangement under which they work, and our officers are really enthusiastic in making sure that discrimination doesn't occur, not with our knowledge on the authority. We're just getting into appointing mental health champions on the district council. And if you look on our Stroud District web, we're looking for people who are interested in leading on that. There is a work description for people who are interested. There are 3 people at the moment, but it's quite a large authority. There are coming up to 350 members of staff, plus of 50 officers. So So that's an area which we want to develop at the moment. We've also been asked to talk about the use of language, and our view, which we're feeding back to council, is that when it comes to generic terms, we would suggest the use of they rather than he or she. But what we haven't clarified, I think, is our language in relation to people with disabilities. And personally, I do not like the term disabled people, because it's as though the term disability is the first and then people follow it. Whereas if you use the term people with disabilities, it shows where the priority is. But I would appreciate people's views on that. We're currently working, I won't go on, but we're currently working with the Gloucestershire Sight Loss Council to increase awareness and action in relation to people with visual handicaps. And we've had a session in Wootton-under-Edge, and in December there'll be another session based in Berkeley. I think perhaps I'll perhaps stop there. But let me finally mention the Black Boy statue, which isn't it isn't an issue of disability, but nevertheless it's a considerable concern to people in the district. And there have been complaints about this statue, which is in Black Boy House. And so we carried out a consultation with people in the district, and we had about 1,600 replies, of whom over 70% disliked and did not want to see the Black Boy statue in town, and suggested it should be lodged in a local museum. But at the moment, we're just trying to work out whether it's possible, given that central government are very much against removing these statues following the Colston statue. So I suspect we're going to have an uphill battle in trying to give effect to what people want there. Let me stop now and we'll have a discussion.
Thanks, Norman. Thanks for giving us that local view on what's happening in Stroud District with regards to equality and diversity and inclusion work, which, like you say, is something that's, maybe it was our wonderful Martin who kicked it off, but it's, you know, something that's supported very much locally, and a piece of work that I'm sure will stretch far and wide. I think it was interesting what you were saying around latent prejudice, and something that you know, nature versus nurture, what you grew up with. But I think that, like you said, everybody is capable of changing an opinion and changing minds, and it is about you know, understanding other people and their perspectives and what they go through on a daily basis that helps people do that. Good to hear that we're getting all the way down to things like mental health champions. I think that is fantastic. But do we have a disability champion in the district that is championing the voice of you know, people with disabilities? Might also be something to think about. And I know we had a whole session where we discussed the Black Boy statue and the Colston statue and what these things mean, and how it would be, there's many more people in the world that would be maybe more deserving of having the statue, or where it comes from and things like that. So all interesting topics, and thank you for giving us that overview. So I've been gently scanning the chat, and I know there's quite a few questions on this topic, but I'm gonna ask Ursula Bilson to come in with their question. Right up at the top of the chat, if you're looking for it, Ursula. If you'd like to unmute yourself, and feel free to put your camera on if you wish, but if not, don't worry. And if you ask, and it's not particularly a question, but I think this is an interesting topic for us to discuss as a group. So
Hi. Yeah, I wonder how many people are aware of things like access to work and what conditions and disabilities fall under that, i.e. something that is covered under the Equality Act. I've worked with supporting people with disabilities and recently did have that conversation with a member of staff who had asked for a reasonable adjustment of starting an hour later in the morning due to long-term effects of COVID, and it didn't go well. And so hence said, I do happen to know this is covered under the Act. You don't need to, go in full guns blazing and quote this to your line manager, but so long as you're on the right lines and you're absolutely right to ask for this. And it wasn't a difficult thing for them to agree to. It shouldn't be a problem. And so we still have a problem, even as an organisation that puts a lot of effort into trying to support people. And then this morning I had a conversation with somebody about comms and marketing, nothing directly related to, and they said, oh yeah, and I've got a disability, I've been here 3 weeks, but my line manager's put everything in place I need, so I don't think I need to talk about reasonable adjustments or access to work. And that's the same organisation. But he had no idea that he got an inflammatory bowel condition, and was like, oh, I would never have thought in previous workplaces that was covered under the Act and I could get support. So I just wonder how many, maybe we're a group of people who are very aware, but how many people know about that?
Thanks, Ursula. Great question. Mags, if you want to go first, you got your hand up, I can see.
Yes, it's quite interesting you raised that, Ursula, because I've recently been writing a paper with Zai that we're taking we want to present to GPEX. And one of the things I used was, although voluntary work like Green Party work isn't covered by access to work, I'm arguing in the paper that actually we should be using that as a sort of gold standard, or even just a decent standard. That although, so for example, we as a disability committee, we often go through this kind of circle of, we get someone keen who wants to do a role, then they take on the role that can be overwhelming, and then they get sick, or their disability causes issues, and then they have to either go off sick or they have to leave, and we lose all of that kind of knowledge, and then we're back to square one. So what part of the paper is arguing is that we need some dedicated admin support to acknowledge that that is a reasonable adjustment to help us as a group be as effective as possible. And so we want the party, that they've signed up to the Equality Act, so we want them to adhere to it. And we're saying that although we know that, like if I was working for the NHS, for example, I would be able to say, I apply for some funding under access to work. We can't do that because we're a voluntary organisation, but we think that gives us some credibility, and there's some evidence base to say the party should be doing this too, funding allowing. So, I think it's a really useful thing to be able to cite and say, we need reasonable adjustments.
Definitely. But I guess, like you say, a lot of people don't maybe know about this stuff unless you're involved in these kinds of worlds. Then it would be good for us to promote it. Okay, Zai, please go.
Okay, in terms of the reasonable adjustments as part of the law, I recently, through supporting through our complaint system, requested a reasonable adjustment. But we actually had somebody on the complaints panel that had a knowledge of that area of disability. The decision was that it wasn't a reasonable adjustment request because we couldn't provide it. And so I took this further and took it right up to the top. And to this day, it, all that anybody had to do was to Google the disability, and there are organisations where we could have approached and if we have to pay for it, so be it. You know, but in you know, everybody actually uses non-reasonable adjustments in all areas, and so we're becoming a society which is you know, that actually will make things as difficult as possible. Can I just comment, because I've seen in the chat that people are talking about people with disabilities. It is not an accepted term, and it has to be accepted that that is how it is. It is the disabled community, and the term that will be used is disabled people. And so can we please, no matter whatever arena that we are in, we have to just accept it. It's not about what people would like to use. It's about what has come from the disabled community. As you know, terminology is in terms of, you know, people of color. We use people of color. Many people out in the broader communities would be aghast by that statement, and because of course the connotations of color. So what we really need is when we're, you know, and it's really good that you've got an EDI group, and you know, we've just gone through a very big you know, looking at EDI in the party, but actually if you haven't got the people in the room, you've got to bring the people in the room. And you know what has been said in the chat as well, you know, many people through conversations, suddenly people realize, oh, they've got a disability as well. But actually what we need to be, we should be coming from a point where people don't have to declare what, you know, what their disabilities are. The Act is quite clear about that. And you know, the Equalities Act of 2010. So it's really important that we do come away with you know, just accepting that in certain, you know, certain communities, that these are the words that will be used, and you know, we have no right to say we don't like it.
Thanks, Zoe,
Thank you.
for clarifying. And I think that that is one of the things that we have in these discussions for, so that these things can be clarified. So we appreciate that. Norman, did you have a comment?
Yes, I have a hearing impairment, and it does cause significant problems when I'm trying to participate fully in meetings. And that's not only the district council meetings. There's only one room in the district council which is set up for people who might have hearing impairments. If we meet in any other room, then I have not insignificant problems in hearing and in making myself understood. And there's only so many times you can say, can you say that again, please? Eventually, I find myself just smiling and nodding. But that it's not only the district council, it's happened in the Green Party as well. I went to a conference that was held at Newport, and I had great difficulty in hearing what was happening during the meeting, to such an extent that there was no point in me staying. That hasn't happened in the biannual conferences. They're always very well set up, but it's something which we do need to be clear about.
Thanks, Norman. And yes, absolutely appreciate that. It's something from working in the NHS that is an absolute must when organising an event, but I think that that doesn't always, you know, trickle down into other organisations. So good to bring it to people's attention. Okay, I can see a hand, and I'm so sorry if I say this wrong. Is it Loppy Ubridge?
Yes, it's Loppy.
Loppy, okay, perfect, thanks.
What I wanted to say is that quite a few people have mentioned disciplinary committee. I'm actually on disciplinary committee, and I can tell you that the biggest discrimination that's going on in the party is on the basis of belief, people's belief, and people with different beliefs clashing with each other. What we really need is to have an independent disciplinary. That's what we need, because otherwise you get the situation where people with one belief stand for and get elected on, because nobody wants to be on disciplinary. They get elected onto disciplinary committee, and then on the basis of their belief, they judge people. Now this has got to stop. We really need an independent committee that will hear people on the basis of all the characteristics in the Equality Act. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Loppy. A very good point, and I think you're right. You know, putting resource and effort into these things are really important, and making sure that it's an independent and objective panel or you know, workplace is really important. Okay, there's so much chat going on in the chat that I've really lost my place. So right at the beginning of this, I saw some comments around COVID and long COVID. If anybody has a question about long COVID, then please put your hand up and unmute. Actually, there was a really great question around, oh gosh, there's a lot of this around language. I know that we've covered that. Please, if you have a question, put your hand up, and I'll try and come to you. Okay. Oh, Rachel.
Yeah.
Hi.
Ooh, can I speak then?
Yes, you can speak.
Can you hear me?
Ask a question, please.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, I might be needing to do some mediation sessions, probably quite a few actually, you know, to do with a complaint. And I'm autistic. And so I'm going to be asking for a mediator who understands autism and understands how people with autism might react in those sort of situations, because being in this situation of maybe needing to do mediation has made me realize how hugely, massively disadvantaged I would be if there wasn't a mediator there that understood autism. I'm fairly recently diagnosed, and I'm still coming, I was a very, very late diagnosed person, still coming to terms with it. And I'm, what's the best, I feel like an unexploded firework a lot of the time. And I would hate to be in a situation where someone said something that made me really upset and angry, and then I got into trouble for being upset and angry because, you know, there wasn't a properly qualified mediator. So do you think that's a reasonable request? Do people think that's a reasonable request? Because I actually don't think I could do mediation unless there was a mediator who might understand how I might react and understands the communication issues that I would have, and especially in a very stressful situation. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, really important point. And I think that, like you say, in these high stress situations, in complaints panels or whatever it might be, to have someone who understands your needs is incredibly important. Absolutely. Okay, Zai, would you like to come in on that?
Yeah, I would actually, because first and foremost, yeah, for some reason, members of the party, people who are different, have different ways of communicating. The party seems to want people to communicate in the way that they want people to communicate. So one of the things that we know that the party attracts many people who are on the neurodiverse spectrum. We know this.
Yeah, we do.
And one of the things that is highlighting is that there are more and more complaints against people who are on the spectrum, and I think this is a very worrying trend, and it's something that I've been raising, and this is where I say that we have to have reasonable adjustments, and also in terms of so we need to bring in specialists and independent specialists, not people that are within the party, independent specialists. But the other thing that I'd like to raise in terms of mediation, I'm not sure, and I'm talking on a personal basis, I'm not actually sure I want to go into mediation with somebody who's upset me around and this happened to me quite recently, where I felt that I'd personally, I was aggrieved, and I just wanted to have with a few people, just have a chat about why I was aggrieved, and come and deal with it amongst ourselves in an amicable manner. But they went directly to a mediation. Well, I was not going to go into a formal situation and to go into mediation with people that I possibly didn't feel that were qualified. Because the fact we have people internally does not mean to say that that's what their profession is. And so I think asking people who've been aggrieved, and it may be to do with them challenging the way people are, in terms of wanting change of you, the individual, I think is unacceptable. And I think we have to have this discussion in the party as to, if we are inviting people to come and join us, and we have a larger group of people, we actually have to accept that behavior may be different. And we have to find an acceptable way of supporting those people, not going through, oh, I've tried, I've told them this, I've said this to them, and they don't listen. Well, it may be they can't, or it may be that somebody doesn't actually understand what you're saying. And we have to change this, because it's destructive. And the person who's going to be destroyed is the person that has those needs, not the person that's complaining. They're not being destroyed. And I, the party really has to start taking some responsibility. And one of the things that I feel, and at very high level, we are not taking responsibility in any area. And I feel that and that's one of the things I will be pushing for the last 8 months of me being in equalities, diversity, is that the party has to take responsibility for, we've allowed too much to happen to people for too long without taking responsibility in stopping it. And I know I'm sounding very hard, and I hope I haven't brought this meeting down to a low level, but I believe it has to be said. So that's my view on that. And at the end, can I just say something about the Paralympics 2012, and that would be the end of me. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. No problem. We'll come to the speakers for a final word at the end of the session anyway. I just wanted to ask if either of our other speakers wanted to comment on sort of very broadly mediation, complaints, processes within the party. Is that you, Mag, saying yes? Okay, she's unmuting. Yep. Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, I think there has been quite a few. I've heard quite a few concerns raised by people about the complaint system being overburdened, and I think it links back to our code of conduct as well. And I'm not sure if either of those things were written with, I suppose, people with some neurodiverse traits, whatever you want to say, in mind. So I do think we need to be very mindful of the fact that people might not mean to give offence, or they might not mean to articulate things in a particularly aggressive manner. But if it's then, it can be viewed by people that way. And I think we need to ensure that the complaints process is reviewed so that people aren't disadvantaged because they have a disability. So I do have some concerns that at the moment I think it's it could marginalize people or make them frightened to be themselves, and that needs to be thought about. And I think we need to perhaps modernize or refresh some of our policies and the complaints process.
Okay, thanks, Mags. For that, Norman, did you want to say anything on this subject? Or if not, I'm being told that I've missed loads of questions and I'm in lots of trouble. So
I was just trying to reply to somebody who talked about the effects of long COVID, and I was about to type that it just hasn't come to the attention of our EDI group at all, but I will raise it at our next meeting, which is next week, just in order to try and find out to what extent it's affecting members and staff, and then if it is, what we need to do to respond to it.
Okay, thanks, Norman. Yeah, that was a question from Anna, who is one of our local Young Greens. So thanks for responding to that. Okay, so I've been told that I've missed a question from Lynn. Lynn, if you want to come in first, and then I will go to hands and things after that. Sorry for everyone for getting the order mixed up.
Thank you, Jenny. This has really been an amazing discussion. I've learned so much tonight. The question I have really is, as somebody who immigrated to the UK, when I lived in the US years ago, there was the Americans with Disabilities Act that was passed in the early 80s, late 70s, and it really had an impact, and I can see it when I go back to the States now. It's really had a strong impact on. I'm being told I sound distorted. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. It's a little wobbly, but we can hear you.
Then Jenny, can you just read what I put in the chat, because I can't fix it.
Yeah, sure, no worries. So just to repeat that Lynn is from the US and made a wonderful choice to come over here and bless us with her presence. But when sorry, I'm scrolling. When the Disability Act in the US was implemented quite some time ago. Sorry, I'm scrolling to try and find the. Oh, there we go. So after moving to the UK, it really struck Lynn that there seems to be a lot less enforcement or consideration for accessibility in buildings, footpaths / curbs and sidewalks or pavements, transport and employment. Do you think there is a lack of political will, or is this the legislation is just weak in the UK? So, Mags, you're unmuted, so I'm going to pick on you first. Thanks,
yeah,
Lynn.
I think it's both, actually. I've noticed in my local area in Leicester that when shortly after the Disability Act, cafes and things, they all, they made a bit of a ham-fisted attempt to make sure that they were compliant, and they so doorways and things and access was better. But what I've noticed in the last couple of years is that cafes and places have brazenly stopped providing decent access because they know there is no enforcement. So they can get away with it. And I think, having looked at some issues, from a personal level, I think the way the legislation has been set up, it's so difficult because it's often an individual disabled person who has to take whoever to court or whatever. So it just feels exhausting. And when you're already exhausted from, just being able to get up in the morning and have a shower sometimes, the idea of taking on an organisation or someone to fight for the right and say that this is illegal, I think it's really unfortunate and demeaning that it's been set up in that way. And I personally think that national charities should be doing, that the advocate for disabled people should be doing a lot more of that, maybe doing, for example, test cases. That's all.
Thanks, Mags. No, thanks. Sorry, it's me unmuting this time. Okay, Zai or Norman, did you have anything that you wanted to say on this comment? No, from Norman?
Yeah.
Zai, okay, perfect. Thank you.
Sorry, did Norman want to come in first? Did you?
No, he was shaking his head.
Okay.
Don't worry. You first.
Okay. The big difference is that in America, they have a constitution. So when the legislation is made, it has bite. In this country, and as Mag, it doesn't necessarily have bite. The other thing that's changed is, and again, that's something that's changed over the last few years, is that there is no legal aid. So a lot of people are having to pay to take cases to court. And in terms, so that makes it more difficult, because if people don't have the finances, I think the other thing is we have to be very honest about. I only know of one disabled charity that is for a disability, that is actually run by that disability for that disability. Most of the big charities like Scope are not. They are run, they are run by people who do not have that disability, and that their committees are full of non-disabled people. So that they're not. And really, it's all, many of these very big charities, it's about money. And where they get their money is, and the government are really happy on this, what happens is the government goes to them in terms of asking their views, etc. And often the people that it applies to are not being asked at all, because the organisations aren't dealing with that. Quickly, in terms of long COVID and COVID, I'd like to remind people that 60% of the people that died of COVID had a learning disability. And we still haven't, really acknowledged that. And a lot of disabled people were left to die. And, that is the fault of the health service. Because also what we have to remember is at the very beginning of all of this, NICE and the health service set up a point system of who was going to get treatment and who wasn't. And I can assure you, somebody who needed a lot of support, so I was going to be someone that would, if I had got COVID during that time, I would never have been given any treatment. And it's very much that the medical model is very much about the curing. If we can't do for something, the medical profession find it very difficult to handle. So, in terms of long COVID, we haven't, and the people who are being affected quite largely are young people. Because again, the way that we have treated or dealt with COVID throughout the whole of the period of time, and again, it's that from our government, is that, you know, it wasn't something for young people to worry about. It wasn't, and even now, it's, you know, they were people that weren't offered vaccinations, whether you agree with it or not, but they weren't offered. And it was felt that they were, you know, they weren't going to suffer. Well, actually, a large number of the people in our population that have suffered appallingly from long COVID have been what have been seen as healthy young people. And now that the government has a view that COVID is over, the people who are suffering and are getting COVID time and time and time again are our young population. And we are heading for a really bad health prognosis in the next 5 to 10 years, where a large proportion, and we won't have a health service to deal with this. We have to, you know, we have to change our attitudes on how to prevent people from getting COVID. Now, it's not a popular view, but if people wear masks, then you're less likely to catch it or pass it on. And we have to, you know, and everybody has to care about other people. But if you don't care about other people, care about yourself. Care about the fact that you don't want to get COVID. It is now coming out that if you get COVID numerous times, it is going to affect you, your neurological system. And trust me, people do not want to have a situation where their neurological system is affected in the long term. So in terms of long COVID, we actually, and the Green Party has to start dealing with this. I went to conference and I was appalled, absolutely appalled, in the fact that people hadn't been asked to do tests when they were there. They weren't asked to wear masks. I saw people who didn't look well, who were still in rooms. I mean, we have to take some response. Again, it's about responsibility. And again, I think, you know, the party struggles in taking responsibility.
Thanks, Di, for that. I think it is a really important message, and especially as more things are opening up now and more big events are happening and conferences are happening and stuff like this. I think it's yeah, a really big issue and a really big topic that's coming to light. But thank you everyone for your questions. Right, I don't know why I'm not seeing hands. I'm sorry. I'm not also seeing some of the questions that are coming in. I can see one from Martin. Martin, I think this will be the final question, and then we're going to have final thoughts from all of our
Could we ask
speakers.
Mandy, because Mandy has actually had her hand up for about 15-20 minutes.
Sorry, I'm not seeing any hands. Okay, very quickly from Mandy, and then we'll have from Martin if we've got time, and then away we go. Hi, Mandy.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to say a big thank you to the three speakers. It's been brilliant, but also shocking. I just wondered, in terms of us being able to put pressure on the party, and I really applaud the way Zai is absolutely indefatigable in this and gets a lot of flack for it. But things like the Disability Awareness Month is coming up, and I know we need to be aware all year, but it's coming up mid-November for a month. And I very much doubt the party's got any plans for it particularly. What can we do to try and put pressure on the party? I mean, we celebrate Pride Month, you know, Green Party changes its Twitter logo. There's been an LGBT roadshow, and I'm of that community, but we don't get the same emphasis on disability issues in the party. What can we do to put pressure on the party, and could we use that Disability Month to try and make demands? Thanks.
Thanks for being so patient, and sorry that I've missed you somehow, but great question. And yes, okay, so Disability Month is coming up, and you're right, it's important for us to be aware of these things all year round and always, but how can we yeah, emphasize this month and champion disabled people and get the message out there that this needs to be more prominent. So our speakers, let me know if you want to come in on this. I think Mags is trying to unmute herself, it looks like. Yes, okay,
yeah.
fantastic.
So I suppose on the positive side, there has been improvements in that. I think last year or the year before last, they didn't know anything about it. Last year, they actually contacted me and said, "Oh, we're going to put the disability pride flag up," which was, or they put it up, which was great. The only unfortunate thing was it was the old one, which was apparently, because it looks a bit like a squiggle, and some people with some disabilities found it very hard, so they've changed it. So that was a bit. So we had to remove that from Twitter. But you know, it was quite heartening that they were trying a bit more. But you know, yes, there's just not the same focus on it in the party. But I think the more that we talk about it, and more that we're, you know, that people even retweet or just highlight it, I think the more it kind of goes into people's mindset, really. Because I think a lot of people who, you know, all of us are, most of us are volunteers in the Green Party, and we all want to try and make a difference. So there is the heart there, but it's just not matched by actions always.
Thanks, Mags. Zai or Norman, did you want to say anything on this? Zai, I see you've unmuted first. There you go.
Okay, so what we could all, our local parties, our regional parties, could hold events during that month around disability. You know, maybe, you know, access. So one of the big things at the moment is if you go along streets, high streets, where there are shops. I mean, you know, if you have a difficulty with vision, you have a difficulty with mobility. I mean, the pavements are just full of tables and chairs, and you know, and one thing I'd like to highlight is I'm tired of people walking into me because they're on their phones. You know, when people are on their phones, they can't walk in a straight line. And, you know, so maybe we could have, you know, just promote something like be mindful, you know, and have events locally. Let's go to some of the local, I don't know, groups that we're part of or whatever, and get them to raise. So for me, it was, let's have some events on that month. Let's do something. It doesn't have to be a big thing. Sometimes a small thing, but maybe going into the local communities and raising the issue using that. Yeah, and so that's for me is I think how we can start. I think also that we, you know, local parties, we really have to be pushing the head, you know, top of the party in doing stuff. We have to get the party to be tweeting, but from national level, not from our spokespeople or from me, or the party has to be doing it, and we need to get them, you know, we need to be putting pressure on the party, on our leaders. You know, we have 3 leaders, you know, the chair of the party, GPRC. Let's put pressure on them, saying, what are you going to do? What are you going to organise to ensure that we as a party celebrate this month and raise the issues on disability?
Thanks, Zai. I think that's a great idea. And like you say, and I think there's also some comments in the chat about like email national party and say, we want resources and, you know, visuals to use on social media, and get them to make them so that then they can be disseminated within all the parties that maybe don't have the resource or knowledge to do that. So fantastic. Norman, did you have anything to say on this before we do final words from speakers? Okay, I don't see anybody unmuting quickly. Okay, so what a fantastic session this has been, and really, you know, interesting and inspiring, but at the same time horrifying, and, you know, really difficult to hear the things that people go through on a daily basis from a whole range of perspectives, wherever you're coming from, whether it's somebody who is autistic or somebody who is disabled or someone who is hard of hearing or has sight loss. All of these people, who are all of our friends and all of our families and all of the people in our own communities, are dealing with this on a daily basis. So it is not on them to continually tell us to do better. It is on us to do better and to be better and to demand better from every level of government and policy making, and internally and externally within the party. I always like to ask our speakers at the end, what is one thing that you want people to take away from this session? If everybody's not been listening this entire time and they've just turned the telly off and they've come back to the webinar, what would you like to tell them to go home with in sort of 30 seconds to 1 minute? Okay, Norman's volunteered to go first. Off you go, Norman.
To thank people for their contributions tonight, and it certainly gave me quite a lot to think about and to take action about. I've already said that at the council's equalities group meeting next week, I want to raise the issue of physical access to buildings in the community, and also there are other issues to look at. So I'll be taking that away next week. Thank you.
Thanks, Norman. So there you go, from conversation to action in 1 week. Right, Mags, you are unmuted.
Oh, sorry.
I was going to say you go now, not to mute yourself. No, you tell us your takeaway.
So I'm feeling really energized and I'm actually quite positive after this. But it's also fired me up a bit, I think. But one thing I would take for anyone who's disabled out there, and this is one thing I'm gonna thank Zai for, really, is although I've had MS for many years and I use a stick now, I used to always hide it in literature. So whenever I was standing for a particular thing, you know, there was a photo, I put the stick behind my leg, and it wasn't until I had a conversation with Zai that I actually thought, no, you need to own it. You need to be proud, and you need to be showing very visibly if you have a disability and that you are, you know, able to contribute, more than contribute. So I suppose one thing I would say take away from this is for people to just go away and feel very proud of themselves or someone they know, and just encourage them to own it. It's not a dirty secret.
Thanks, Mags. Okay, so you've already been inspiring one of our other speakers' final words, so let's see whatever you have to say as well. Thanks.
Okay, so I'm just going to make a quick statement and then I'll see what I'll have to say that I will have taken away. So we had the Paralympics, and the sad thing about our Paralympics, we actually had no legacy. One of the legacies of Tokyo was that by 2030, that they were going to across the world try and eliminate in terms of disabled discrimination. So you know, I mean, it's a big ask, but at least, you know, there was a legacy. At least there was something. So for me, to take away, I mean, what's been great is that, like, people have come along, you know, to listen to us and talk. So that's a real positive. One of the things I'd like us to just take away for ourselves is, actually, it's not negative to be disabled. I'm actually really proud, and I have, you know, I'm proud to have a disability. I'm proud that I've been able to work throughout my life and to travel, and yes, things are more difficult. So I think, you know, that what would be nice for people to take away is to push the positives of, you know, that it's not a negative thing to have a disability. And just the other thing to take away is at some point in all of our lives, whether we are young or senior or whatever, at some point in our life, we will end up having a disability of some form. And so take away to invest ensuring that when that does happen to you, that we in society and within the party, that we have, you know, we have good infrastructures. So that would be for me. Yeah, it's hard hitting, but that would be the thing for me. And just a huge thank you for asking me to come.
No, our pleasure having you here, and thank you for, you know, sharing this with your friends and colleagues who have also come as participants. We really appreciate that. Everyone taking the time. I think, you know, a summary, it's impossible to summarize everything that's been talked about today, but the green vision for the future should be one that is disabled friendly, and not just disabled friendly, but disabled first. And it should be that is the integral part of our infrastructure, our policy making, and our campaigning, and how the Green Party works and how it is also beyond that. So really appreciate you all coming and sharing your expertise. Everybody who has come and left comments in the chat, we really appreciate that as well. We look forward to seeing you again, hopefully at the next Cloud Cafe. We will share the link to the recording of this session, so please share it far and wide. We invite everybody at the end to put their cameras back on and give our speakers a wave so that they know they haven't just been talking to themselves this whole time. But yes, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, taking the time. Have a wonderful, however probably rainy and dark November it might be, but yes, we look forward to seeing you at the next session, and thank you for taking the time to join us. Have a wonderful evening.
Bye.